Welcome to Remember Me by Intervivos, the show about living life to its fullest, leaving a legacy, and deciding how you will be remembered. And now, your humble team of expert planners, taking the legal world by storm.
Hi, welcome to Remember Me. I'm Glenn Wagstaff. I'm here in the studio with Mike Black. And we want to wish you a happy Independence Day tomorrow. So today's show, we're talking all about financial independence. And last week we had a special guest that came on, and we were talking a little bit about methods to be able to establish a legacy of wealth, to be able to perpetuate from generation to generation and kind of keep that going. But really, in this kind of line of thinking, to give your family financial freedom, financial independence, in perpetuity, which I think a lot of us think is, a really high ideal. But we wanted to start with talking a little bit about, what does financial independence mean to people? Because it can mean a lot of different things.
Yeah, I think financial independence, when I was younger, I thought financial independence meant you had just money out your ears. You didn't know, you had so much you didn't know what to do with. But as I'm growing older, I'm learning that independence, the financial side of it, doesn't necessarily mean you have a lot. It's just you have enough and you have sufficient, and you can pick and choose and you can do what you want because you don't really necessarily need to do anything. You have passive income, or you have other things that are bringing in, have money there that you really don't, or you can minimize everything that you're doing and live a minimalistic life. So I guess it means different things to everybody.
It means different things. So my 6-year-old, has been asking me recently when I'm going to retire. He's like, saying that maybe I could work a couple more years and then retire and I'll be done, right? And, that way I don't have to go to work and I can just spend time with him all the time, right?
Right, yeah.
And, in a way that sounds good. But also, it's just kind of an interesting concept that sometimes we have in our mind of, retirement, that once you're retired, then, it's a life of ease and no responsibility. And, but that's not what retirement's like for everybody either.
That's right. I was reading some articles about this, and one guy says, when he did retire, it was kind of a letdown because he was used to being in charge, being the boss and feeling important. And then when he was retired, it's like he had to reinvent himself because he didn't have any responsibility. Nobody felt like he didn't feel important anymore. Didn't feel like he had a purpose in life. So I think you have to really understand what retirement means to you. You gave us a quote last night, something to do with when what you do becomes part of who you are, why would you ever stop doing it? And why would you want to stop if it's just who you are?
Yeah. Financial independence, I think, is linked in a lot of people's minds to how much income you have.
Right.
And there's a lot of people out there that you're probably listening and you're thinking, well, financial independence to me means having enough coming in that it more than covers my needs and that I don't necessarily have to work to bring it in. So we call that passive income, right?
Right.
So certainly that could be one aspect of financial independence. But we were talking earlier about, financial independence can also mean being debt free and getting away from obligations. And
yes.
Because, a lot of times we think of wealthy people and we think, oh, well, of course they're, financially independent, but that's not necessarily true. Sometimes there's people that have very high incomes and are living month to month, paycheck to paycheck, right?
Yes. In fact, sometimes they're even worse off than the people that don't have as much money.
Yeah.
Because they've got higher debt and higher obligations and more pressure.
And sometimes maybe it's not even income. Maybe they have a large inheritance or a big windfall from wherever the source, but they have creditors chasing them.
Right.
Or they have, right? And those obligations, that's the weight on your shoulders that, really, I think the freedom from stress is what most of us are trying to get away from, right?
I like that, freedom from stress, because that takes a big weight off your shoulders. And, I think that's what I'd like to work for, is freedom from stress.
Yeah. And for some people, maybe it even means, freedom from your boss. Maybe you just hate having to clock in every day, right? And your sense of financial freedom or financial independence is being able to, get out of the JOB, right? Jail operating as a business, right? For the employees out there that just hate clocking in. But whatever financial independence means to you, what we're going to explore today is we're going to talk a little bit about, how do you perpetuate the ability to provide financial independence for your posterity, right? Because, when you're leaving a legacy, it's one thing to enjoy it for yourself, but it's another thing also to be able to take what you've learned, what you've earned, what you've, been able to develop and then leave that to the next generation to give them a step up without ruining them.
Right. Also, they don't have to start over again. It's there. And giving them, like you said, it's a step up. It's actually it's passing the baton, so to speak, in a race. But the race is always going. And hopefully nobody drops that baton.
Right.
But, it's going and going and going, and then it's just not one generation. It's the next generation on, in perpetuity.
Yeah.
That word is hard for me sometimes.
And especially when we look at, the inequalities of wealth,
yes,
that are out there historically, right? One of the interesting things is that the trend that in order to change things, I heard not too long ago, just a few years ago, that the first generation of African American millionaires were kind of coming into their height, right? Mm-hmm. And sometimes it takes a long time for that generational wealth to be able to play out, because it really does take going from generation to generation to generation, being passed down, and then seeing whether it actually stays or whether it just disappears.
Right. And like you say, passing those values, but they've got to be able to stick. Because, if something's important to you, you want your kids to understand that and learn that as well. I mean, my kids are diametrically different. I've got 3 of them. And my son, don't have to worry about him. My oldest daughter, she's a challenge. And my youngest daughter, we're trying to get her to understand some things too. But it's trying to get those values, and and it's independent, and it's tailor-made to each child. They have completely different thinking.
So one of the stories we kind of want to explore for today is, a couple weeks ago we were talking about the Carnegie, and we were talking about people who have set an example of giving and philanthropy and that sort of thing. But one of the most wealthy people in American history was Cornelius Vanderbilt, and he built a ginormous empire right at the time. Yep. And he was the wealthiest person in the country for his lifetime. Right. And then, when he passed on his wealth, his family was the wealthiest family for a long time. But it's an interesting case study because, we were going to talk about, the Vanderbilts as compared to
the Rockefellers.
The Rockefellers, right?
Right.
The Vanderbilts, that generational wealth didn't last.
No.
And the Rockefellers, it did.
Yep.
So, you've been reading a lot about this, Mike, but what was the thing that you saw as maybe the biggest difference, or, tell us a little bit about kind of your reactions to the story here. And for those of you who don't know the story, it's a great story. There's actually, I don't know if there's a specific a series on, what happened to the wealth after the fact. That might be interesting. But
I'm going to have to get more into the book to find out, because I bet there is some kind of case study in there.
But there's definitely series about how these men, built their empires and their wealth and everything. But yeah, what was your thoughts on the difference?
Well, when Vanderbilt was getting ready to, he was getting ready to pass on his inheritance and everything, he told his family to keep the money together. And they didn't do that. They split it up and did little things, bought mansion after mansion after mansion. And literally, they had tons of, investments all over the place, but it was just
spreading it out all over the place.
Spreading it out, just thinned it out. And the Rockefellers, on the other hand, they kept the money together. They created this internal mechanism to where they could actually invest in themselves and use themselves as their own, financial institute. So they didn't have to go outside. And they did what Cornelius Vanderbilt told his family to do. So, and it was really interesting. I'm really interested to get through this book so I can find out all about this, because I want to talk to my family about this as well.
So, one of the interesting things about this is the idea that most people, when they think about their estate, they think, well, I'm just going to leave it to the kids equally. And that's exactly what you're saying, is not keeping it together. That's spreading it out.
Spreading it out. Let the kids do with it. But you have to have, like you said, the values have to be there. But if they keep it together as a family,
there are ways to perpetuate it. So we'll talk more about it when we come back after the break. But again, this show is sponsored by Intervivos. If you want to contact us with any questions, it's 855-335-1030, 855-335-1030. And so this is Remember Me, the show where we talk about leaving a legacy and deciding how you'll be remembered. We'll be back after the break. Welcome back to Remember Me, the show where we talk about leaving a legacy and deciding how you'll be remembered. Before the break, I gave you the number in case you want to reach out and get any questions answered. The number, one more time, and with a correction, is 855-335-1060. That's 855-335-1060. So we're talking about financial independence and how to perpetuate financial independence in your posterity and in, for generations. And we were talking before the break about the Rockefellers and the Vanderbilts. And so, Mike, you were just saying that when it came to the Vanderbilts, they started with an enormous
amount of wealth, and they split it out between the kids, and the kids then they just spent it the way they wanted to.
And now,
from what I understand, Anderson Cooper is the only one of the not heirs, but of the legacy that's actually made his way back into the rich, the wealth. But he's had to come from the bottom up. And,
so now it's just a story from history. Now, there's
history.
A lot of museums, and there's these mansions that were left. A lot of them were torn down, but some of them were converted into museums.
Right? Yeah.
But the family doesn't have the wealth anymore.
Family does not have the wealth anymore. And you look at it. One of my favorite books is Good to Great, and they have a comparison. And these it is a good comparison study, because you see one that went from good to great. Well, they both went to good to great, but then How the Mighty Fall is another one of the books that are part of that series, and you can see that same thing because they have the comparison groups there.
It's interesting because there's this kind of concept, and I don't know how true it is, but a lot of families there may be somebody in the generation that really makes it big, right? And that was the shot that everybody got. Right? Yeah. And, what did they choose to do with the wealth that was made during that time? And maybe it was, it disappeared. And then you hear the stories. A lot of my clients that I sit down with, they tell me stories about their great-grandfather who was really well-to-do or really well-connected. But that didn't continue, right? Didn't get down to them. And then the people who have, made it big now, and what are they doing to leave, to pay it forward and to leave it for the future, if that's a priority, right?
Right.
But it's interesting, I think, simply because every single one of us, doesn't matter, if you're making big income or moderate income, we have millions of dollars passed through our hands over our lifetime.
Right.
And the question is, what did we do with all that value that came to us, And most of us, a lot of times don't think about saving until it's, maybe too late for really establishing the retirement or the future that we're looking for, and much less think about what we want to leave to the next generation until it's too late to be able to leverage that, right?
Right. When I was a kid, I was really, really good at just socking money away. I mean, my brothers would all come to me because they'd ask me for money because I had some. I'd loan it to them. They'd pay me back, but I always had money because I lived a minimalistic life. And when I was, I think, 11, I wanted a bike really, really bad. So I had money. And then I found a bike in the price range that I thought was good. And I told my parents about it. They went up and we found it. And I was able to purchase that with my money. And all I needed, I think I had to borrow a dime from them. I had all the money except for a dime. And, it made me feel good that I could do that. And it was another thing. As an 11-year-old, I felt the financial independence, and it was a good feeling. Yeah. And it's a feeling I want to get back.
Yeah. Well, so last week we were talking a little bit about this concept of a family bank.
Right. I love that concept.
Being able to establish something that the family could benefit from, they can borrow against. Maybe it's there for specific purposes like paying for college so that your loved ones and your posterity don't have to get school loans because they can borrow from the family bank, and maybe they pay back a portion and the portion's forgiven or whatnot. But there's a way for that to perpetuate.
Right, and it's the family bank. If it's used as a bank, the same concepts of the banks. The banks always are able to make more, and it is something that can spread out and go further and further than than it originally started at. So that's the concept I like.
Yeah, so this idea of establishing a family bank, and of course we use different entities and structures and strategies to do it, but you have a framework of decision making so that as it transfers from generation to generation, that there's a way for people to be able to make the decisions and so on, maybe a loan committee or so on. Mm-hmm. And then you have a framework for what's this money to be used for. You have a purpose behind it, right? That you leave. That's, again, part of leaving your values and part of your legacy as well. And establishing that structure, a lot of times we think, well, that's way beyond me. I couldn't do that. But the reality is, there's three common kind of pathways to be able to do this. Of course, the first one is you become very successful, very wealthy. You have the means to be able to set up the family bank by yourself.
Right.
But for a lot of us, that's beyond our reach.
That is beyond our reach.
So the second, way to do it, and we talked about this last week, is if you leverage life insurance, you can establish a legacy of money overnight because you can leverage insurance proceeds to leave millions of dollars when you're gone. And then the question is, what's that money going to be used for? If it just goes to everybody in equal shares and then, average inheritance lasts 7 months, then it's going to disappear.
Right.
It's not going to perpetuate. But if you keep the money together, like we were talking about, you put it into this kind of, family bank structure, then it can perpetuate and sometimes even grow with more life insurance and so on, right? It doesn't have to be life insurance. You can use a lot of vehicles, but the idea is to pool everything together and then have it. We were talking, when was it? We were talking about a lot of immigrant families when they came to the United States.
We were talking about that last night.
Yeah, being able to buy homes.
Yes, being able to buy homes where they actually get into either an apartment or something, but they all live together. They all pool their resources, and then they get to a point where they can buy a home, and they all live in that home. And then they pull the resources again, and then they can buy another home and continue to pool their resources.
Until they help everybody have their own
everybody
home.
Have their own, yes.
But the idea was that they were all combining resources to be able to reach the objective quicker.
Right. And you have to be on the same page. Everybody has to have that common goal. And you can't let the ego get in the way. And those kinds of families, I think they're stronger for it. And then that perpetuates again because they live those values. They can teach those values to the kids because the kids sometimes will live those values for years. And hopefully those will go into the grandkids and, the great grandkids and everything.
So, the third method here is if you don't have, substantial wealth or whatnot to be able to do this sort of thing with, what you want to is to pull together, maybe the siblings or a few family members or whatever, and everybody bring something and put it together to be able to establish the core, and then you start with a little bit and grow that, right? And then, I think this sort of concept is so foreign sometimes to a lot of us that we just write it off. because I know a lot of times I sit down with clients and their families say, Mom, Dad, we don't want your money. We don't need your money, right? You enjoy it, you spend it, but Mom and Dad want to leave it as, as an inheritance or as something to benefit the family. And so there's kind of almost this like tug of war of one side saying we don't want the money and the other side saying, well, we want you to have it. And this sort of concept would be the perfect compromise.
Absolutely. Because then it's available and they can use it with those parameters set on.
And that's how you start establishing a power base of wealth. And by the way, this doesn't have to be done just with money, just with resources, but it can be done also with influence. Because the wealthy,
that's another thing we were talking about yesterday too.
Yeah, they have connections, and if those connections just are lost when somebody dies, then all that influence was lost also. Right?
Exactly, and that's another one of those. You say the values. But those relationships, if you can perpetuate the relationships, then you have that influence, and it's something that goes on for generation after generation, and you don't have to start over every generation.
The most powerful families in the country, it's because all those connections and influence and everything, it wasn't established by one person. It was established over generations.
Over generations, yes.
And so, that's the type of planning that I think if we really want to, change your family's generational future, but also change society and so on from generation to generation, that's what's going to make a difference. So again, if you're curious about this type of planning, listen to our recording from last week's show, but also reach out to us at Intervivos, 855-335-1060. And thanks again for joining us on Remember Me. We'll talk to you next week.